Man, 2024 has been crazy, y'all. Not only has it been crazy, it's been like all the things that have been going on in the world this year alone. They not only seem crazy, but they seem almost abnormal. There's just weird things going on, right? And then that's the stuff in the world, and in my own personal life, I think we've had enough drama and craziness to fill the next 5 years, and this year isn't even over yet, right? And it's just interesting because it seems like thing after thing after thing, it just keeps happening, it keeps piling on, and it's just crazy, and you gotta handle it or move through it or work through it, or it's just so many things going on. And I have a lot of people, because I ask advice, I ask what people think in some of these instances, rather. And a lot of people say I need to slow down. I need to slow down. I need to relax. Look, even my mama says I need to relax. And, well, if mama says it, then it's advisable to listen, unless she not make her famous mac and cheese come Thanksgiving. That would be a problem. But yeah, I've even had some people paint the picture that I need to beef up in my faith a little bit. Because there are more things and more occurrences and more situations that I ought to give to God and let God handle things. So I need to become more faithful to give these things to God. That whole let go and let God thing. And yeah, I don't see it that way. I see it as, so here's what I know, okay? I know there is a time and a place for everything. Everything comes in its due season, right? So understanding that, there's another thing that I know, that I ought to walk through this life with some level of discernment, being able to tell, first of all, good from evil, but being able to tell the truth from the not true, being able to tell the path that I ought to walk and the path that I ought to avoid, right? So two things right there, right? I need discernment, and there's a time and a place for everything. And with that conclusion, I basically came to a point where it's just like, I don't think I need to give anything up. I don't think I need to rest. I don't think I need to pause or stop. I think I simply need to get stronger. And there are many events that have happened up to this point already that kind of bear that out. Okay. But not only do I need to get stronger, I think through a lot of these situations, I simply need to endure. So that's where this topic comes from. All right. Not only do I need to endure, but I want to be able to help you all beef up your endurance. Okay. So it might seem strange that I start with this first, but I'm going to start with physical endurance training first, and you'll see why in a little bit. Okay, so what is, let's in a general sense, what is endurance? Now let me go to my I have the whole little definition written out here, and I don't want to botch it. So so endurance is the ability to continue or last despite fatigue, stress, or other adverse conditions. It's also the ability to bear pain and hardships. So, if you remember a few episodes ago, I talked about this idea of strategic discomfort, right? And basically what that was saying was we ought to get uncomfortable on purpose, right? So that idea is it goes hand in hand with this idea of enduring, of endurance, right? Because how do you build endurance if you don't have anything to endure, right? So strategic discomfort basically allows you to set up a situation in which you have to endure so you can get better at enduring, right? And I want you to keep in mind here that the way I'm presenting it as there is a difference between endurance and stamina. They're not the same thing to me. So let me just break it down. When I say endurance, I say continuing on that energy output while in those adverse conditions. Stamina is what you have before you hit any adverse conditions. Okay? So it's basically a measure of the energy output before you're tired in a physical sense. And the endurance is basically you're tired, how much are you going on? So I see physical endurance in two separate categories here. So the first category is basically cardiovascular endurance or aerobic endurance. And that's basically just measuring the ability of your heart and your lungs to supply blood to your muscles, or supply oxygen to your muscles, right? And then there's muscular endurance or anaerobic endurance, and that's just the ability for your muscles to continue to contract in adverse conditions. Both of these items are over a certain period or an extended period of time, meaning we're like for the cardiovascular one or the aerobic one, we're measuring, or that's your ability for your heart and your lungs to provide oxygen to your muscles over a period of time, an extended period of time, right? That's the endurance, and that's key, right? And the same thing for the muscular endurance. That's the ability for your muscles to continue to contract over a certain period in time or an extended period of time. Okay? So in both instances, both aerobically and anaerobically, to improve upon your physical endurance, you have to, and this is why I started with this one, you have to set your body up in a position in which it has to endure. And then you increase the adverse conditions incrementally, strategically, over time, forcing your body to adapt. Now, that was a lot of words. That was a lot of verbiage there, right? But at the end of the day, you basically to say it in a short way, you want a program that's going to challenge you and test your physical endurance out and then force your body to endure longer each time. That's it. So like an example would be like for the cardiovascular side or the aerobic side, like you could do two versions of cardio, whatever. You could do HIIT, high intensity interval training. And if you were doing that, you basically would say like, hey, okay, I'm going to do 8 20-second high intensity somethings. Okay. And I'll do that for 2 weeks. And then on that third week, I'm going to do 10 20-second somethings. And then I'll slowly progress from there, right, as we go along, thereby increasing the total amount of time that you're operating at high intensity, right? If you were to increase your aerobic endurance doing low intensity steady state, go for a 20-minute something, and the next couple weeks or the third week after that or something like that, go for a 25-minute something, and then the one after that go for a 30-minute something. Just basically, again, just increasing the amount of time you're doing that thing. So in the first example, you're increasing the amount of time that you're at high intensity. In this example, you're increasing the amount of time that you're operating at the lower heart rate, but you're going, further distances or further, for a longer time or what have you, right? And again, both of those will force your body to adapt, right? That's the key word here. Very, very key word here. Adaptation, okay? So, and if you wanted to do the muscular endurance, you pick an exercise. You take a guess as to what I'm going to pick. If you guess bicep curls, you're spot on. So we're guessing bicep curls. So if you did bicep curls, right, and you basically would do a few sets of 20 plus reps, and then the next week or the next 2 weeks you would do 5 sets or something like that at a light weight, of course, right? Or you could do something called AMRAP, as many reps as possible. So you get a little program going on. 1 week you get your baseline set of bicep curls, and I can knock out 25 bicep curls straight before everything sets in. And the next week I might want to go to, say, like 28 bicep curls. And then the week after that, 32 bicep curls. And I would force trying to get to that point where I'm slowly increasing the amount of reps I do, or in the previous example, slowly increasing the amount of sets I do over time. But the overall main point here is to set your body up in selectively adverse conditions and force your body to adapt so that those initial adverse conditions are not adverse anymore, thereby increasing your workload. Okay? That is physical endurance in a nutshell, right? Now, remember, there are a few ideas here that I want you to keep in mind, right? We're setting our body up in adverse conditions. The adverse conditions are absolutely required for endurance, right? Another thing that's required for endurance is time. Now, this very same notion applies to mental endurance, okay? So what is mental endurance? Mental endurance is the ability to think clearly and think rationally in times of prolonged hardship or stress. Let me say that again. It is the ability to think clearly and rationally during times of prolonged hardship or stress. Now, building up mental endurance here is very important. It's very important because building up your mental endurance also builds up your physical endurance, right? Because what you think will become what you do, right? Building up your mental endurance also builds up your emotional endurance, because what you think becomes how you feel. So to build mental endurance, you have to consider your setup. So first and foremost, life is going to throw enough at you for you to be able to get some practice in. Let's just say that. Right? So what you really want to do is to work on your critical thinking skills. And truthfully, that's non-negotiable. You got to beef up your critical thinking, right? You got to look at things for what they are, keep it all factual, and without any regards to how you feel about it, right? We'll deal with the feeling part in a little bit, but up front, think about what it is and keep it 100. Keep it 100 with yourself as you're thinking about this. Again, that's non-negotiable. That's absolutely required. Work on the critical thinking, right? Especially during those times of hardships and pain and adverse conditions, right? The next portion that you would want to work on is your consistency. So first part, and remember, we're still talking about your thinking, okay? So you want to, in order to build up that mental endurance, you want to be pretty skilled at critical thinking. One. Two, you want to be consistent with that, right? Doing something once is one thing. Doing something for like 100 days is a completely different thing. So you want to be consistent and not only just doing the critical thinking, but consistent in your thinking. That's saying another thing as well, right? Keep in mind, if you're doing the critical thinking and you're keeping it all factual and you're consistent with keeping your thinking factual, that is setting you up in a better position. And from that, you'll get a whole bunch of small victories along the way, right? But it really goes back to, and it stems from your critical thinking, right? And let me break that down for you really quick. So critical thinking is the ability to question, acknowledge, and test previously held assumptions, to recognize ambiguity, to examine, to interpret, to evaluate, to reason, and to reflect, right? All of that is covered under critical thinking. So the better you can do that stuff, and the more consistent you are with that stuff, the more consistent you are with your thinking, the better you are at mentally enduring hardships and trials. And a little offshoot of that would be to work on visualization, right? So it kind of works hand in hand with your critical thinking a little bit, but you got to be able to see something on the other side of your issues, on the other side of the hardships, on the other side of all the pain, right? You have to be able to visualize, to see what it's like on the other side, because then that becomes your goal that you're kind of aiming at, right? So now your actions are going to be kind of lined up to achieve that particular goal, and your thinking is going to be lined up in that way as well. So it helps tremendously to visualize. You got to be able to see it. You got to be able to see where you're going here, right? So otherwise you're stuck and you're sitting in the middle of this hardship, or you're sitting in the middle of this pain, and there's no end in sight. That's not how you get better. So you got to see something on the other side. You have to be able to visualize something better on the other side. You have to visualize that other side. Hey, I'll get through this. Hey, I'll get over that hurdle. I'll get over this hump. I'll get through this roadblock, right? You have to be able to see the other side. So some of the people that I've seen who have like some of the greatest like mental endurance typically are athletes, right? And they have to, right? Even in training, a lot of athletes, a lot of the best athletes set themselves up in adverse conditions physically in order to mentally endure. And that's it's so interesting. So there's another thing. That's what it's like, where like life is not just throwing things at you, but you're setting yourself up. You're applying the principle of strategic discomfort by setting yourself up in these adverse conditions and doing what you do in those adverse conditions, right? So like from an athletic perspective, one guy comes to mind, and I always found that he was, I followed him years ago, and every now and again I'll see what he's doing. David Goggins. I mean, he cuss a lot, but that's somebody who I would say has mental endurance, and he plays no games with it. It's literally life or death for him, and he continuously sets himself up in adverse conditions and forces his body to adapt, but it forces his mind to adapt. Like that is probably the perfect example of mental endurance. Okay, now you could also set up a situation where you're doing like cognitive, like structured cognitive exercises under stress, right? Like, and that's something that I've seen a couple things, and I've seen studies, like psychological studies that say that could work, that could benefit you. I tend to just work out, and that's enough for my mental endurance. But I did hear and I did see, actually, in a handful of studies, now that I think about it, people doing different like puzzles and doing different structured like writing exercises and things like that under like extreme conditions, like in extreme heat or extreme cold, or yeah. So there's an idea there too, so that it forces you to kind of be able to think clearly in regular adverse conditions that are maybe not so extreme. but yeah, so that would be mental endurance. Now, next up, emotional endurance. What is emotional endurance? Okay. Emotional endurance is the ability to tolerate emotions of a certain intensity or certain moods during the ups and downs of life, right? So you're better able to handle those extreme emotions, or any emotion really. And the thing is, like, emotional endurance makes you more self-aware. Emotional endurance not only makes you more self-aware, it makes you more likely to achieve certain outcomes. Okay. So like, you have that ability with emotional endurance. You have the ability to level set during times of heightened emotion. Okay. And that can be happiness or sadness or anger. It could be any of the emotions. Also, you're less like you'll have that ability with emotional endurance. You'll have that ability to kind of lock in, right? Instead of fantasizing about doomsday scenarios, as an example, right? And of course, over prolonged periods of time, right? But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. This is one of those things. The more you're able to handle your or tolerate these heightened emotions and still keep it pushing, so to speak, the easier it becomes, and the more ability you have to manage your emotions over the long term, right? So to build emotional endurance, first things first, you have to pay attention, right? So you have to understand what you're feeling when you're feeling it, right? That comes right back down to emotional intelligence once again. Now, I'm not going to go dig into it too deep. I mean, I've already grazed over it for like 2 episodes of the podcast. If you want, go back to those episodes. Okay, of course, go back to A Sound Heart, and go back to when I talk about, actually, it was a random topic when I was talking about empathy as a as a weapon of mass destruction. Go back to those 2 segments, and I talk about emotional intelligence there. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with it, but it's very important in gaining and building emotional endurance. EI is good for building EE. That was corny. And just like what's required for mental endurance, you have to kind of see the other side of the struggle, right? You have to be forward thinking, right? And you use that as an option to, first of all, it changes your thinking, but it also changes how you feel. Where it's like, okay, this won't last forever. It might last a long time, but it ain't going to last forever. And there is another side to this, right? I'm going to get on the other side of this hurdle here. And one thing I noticed about people who lack emotional endurance, they often either live in the past or they live in the what ifs of the future. But either way, they typically are stuck. And then a quick note about the actual emotion, right? So I said happiness and sadness. So could cause you to, err, right? So, and it was like, well, how does happiness, right? So, happiness, sadness, anger, and any extreme, right? Any extreme version of any of that stuff can alter your decision making, right? And not only can it alter your decision making too much, if it's too extreme, if you're like extremely happy, too happy, you're disconnected from reality. If you're too sad, a little really, really sad, you're disconnected from reality. If you're angry, but like too angry, you're disconnected from reality. Right. So the emotional endurance is the ability to tolerate all of the extreme emotions, but the emotions in all of its degrees, and still proceed without like getting stuck because of how you feel. Now, finally, what is spiritual endurance? Okay. So spiritual endurance is the ability to work through pain, hardships, and trials while leaning on God for strength without wavering in your faith and without compromising on what is true. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but let me break it down again. I'll say it one more time. I'm sorry, not emotional. Spiritual endurance is the ability to work through pain, hardships, and trials while leaning on God for strength, without wavering in your faith, and without compromising on what is true. Now, that comes from a lot of different verses in the Bible. It is either, endurance is talked about a lot, whether it's in form of steadfastness or patience, long suffering. Endurance is spoken about or written about quite a bit in a number of different verses. And actually, one sharply comes to mind, Hebrews 12:1. And that, you know what, let me bring that up. Hebrews 12:1, and I always pull from the King James Version. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. And then thinking about it, that also kind of that reminds me of another verse that can go in conjunction with that. It's Romans 5 verses 3. I'll just start with Romans 5:3. And not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, endurance, and patience, endurance, experience, and experience, hope. So let me just read that without me adding my little thing in there, right? So, and not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience, experience, and experience, hope. Okay, those two verses come to mind pretty sharply when I think of spiritual endurance, right? So the question then is, how do you build spiritual endurance? And I'm not going to I'm not going to read every single Bible verse, but I have I have a few, okay? And they say a couple things, right? So Romans 12:12 says that you are to rejoice in hope, remain patient during the trials, and always be in prayer. That pretty much is self-explanatory. So essentially, it's almost like I'll get to that. And James 4:7 tells us to resist the devil, to resist evil, resist the temptation to do evil. Right. And then James 1:2-3 basically tells us to be joyful for the testing of your faith. OK, so those are building spiritual endurance is, in terms of the instructions to do it, very short instructions. Kind of tough to do though, right? But that's what it is really. So you want to invite stay away from evil, enjoy the process of taking on these trials, which is another hard thing to do, and continue to lean on God for strength without compromise and without wavering. And that's how you build up spiritual endurance. Now, that covers all of it. That is how we are to endure. Now, hopefully I give you enough to go off of there. I gave you chock full of stuff. So get the exercising. Like literally get exercising. Physically, get out there and get active, right? But mentally, get active. Emotionally, get active. Spiritually, get active, right? And that's how you build up. That's how you force your body, your mind, your heart, and your soul to adapt, right? We're trying to force these adaptations so that we can grow, so that we can withstand these things for longer periods of time. All right. Yeah. So hopefully this helps, and we'll be moving on. All right. Let's get out there and beef up our endurance, though. So if you like this segment, here's another one for you. Click over here, and if you want the entire podcast, go this way. Click on that one right there. And once again, I appreciate you. All right. You take it easy.